Almost 8 months since the BP oil spill, and crude is still caked to the sand here in southern Louisiana. We take a look at just how safe is the local seafood.
The food source from the Gulf of Mexico, whether it's Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, or Florida, is the most tested food source there is in the world, and will continue to be the most tested food source for some time to come.
You know the saying, you are what you eat? Well...
But Al is not convinced that testing is as complete as they say it is.
You know, we believe they're lying. That's what we really believe. We believe they're lying. You mean, you cannot tell me this is not going to affect seafood. There's no way. It's impossible. And that's what we got right there. It's all oil.
Al Walker is a man on a mission to tell the world the oil from BP's spill has not left the Gulf. Gentle revving of his outboard motor is all it takes.
See the tar, boss? Look at that.
Al's a fisherman with no customers on his books right now, who's recently been denied further compensation from the emergency fund set up to help small business people like him. He's dying to work on the cleanup, but says the authorities won't let him.
These oysters are 90% dead.
He digs around in the meat of the oyster.
See the yellow inside? That's what the oyster biologist told me. When there's a yellow in there, that's from contaminants.
Oil-saturated mangroves, baby. Just dead. Everything's dead.
Back on what Al calls Oil Island, where sea creatures struggle in the oily tidal pools, Al is a worried man. The future of his business, his health, and his family are all uncertain. The same could be said about the economy around the waters of the Gulf. John Terrett, Al Jazeera, Louisiana.
60% of all seafood consumed in the United States comes from the Gulf of Mexico. And the guy who said that the seafood in the Gulf is the most tested seafood in the world, you know, basically was lying through his butt. Just a few weeks ago, there was a conference in Atlanta of the major seafood producers. And, I mean, they were in conflict because basically there was the guys in denial saying, well, you know, we haven't been told we can't fish. I mean, these guys are desperate to try and obviously, you know, recover some form of income stream. But then you've got the others who, you know, basically have some integrity, and they're saying there's no way we're going to be responsible for putting this seafood onto the tables of the American nation. And again, you know, go Google this for yourself and you'll see the contamination within the fish. You'll see the fish that's gutted and basically there's oil in their digestive systems. You saw the oysters. I mean, the shrimping industry is basically dead. And I certainly wouldn't be touching any seafood anytime if I visit the US anytime soon. As you'll see, I certainly won't be visiting the southeast of the United States. So we've not just got the oil, of course, we've got the gases that are coming up. And, you know, even though there is no reporting, you know, we're still getting reports from some of the Gulf Coast communities. The methane level, when it's tested in their communities, is way above the level which is considered to be safe. Now, there are some geologists who are still concerned about the methane and the pressure of the methane building up on the seabed. You know, and some have actually predicted an underwater Mount St. Helens. You know, Mount St. Helens, when it blew, the mountain rose by 300 feet, but then it only had one atmosphere pressing down on it. Under the seabed, you know, it has water pressure of about 1 metric ton per square inch at this depth. So, you know, you're not necessarily going to see a massive rise in the seabed. But if it does blow, and my geologist contacts suggest that, you know, that risk is diminishing over time. But if it does blow, then basically Florida is complete toast, because the tsunami is just going to wash right across the Florida peninsula. But the levels of sickness that are being reported in the Gulf Coast, but only being reported locally in the Gulf Coast, are horrendous. What is happening is reports are appearing in the local papers and on the local TV channels, but they're not being broadcast or published outside of that area. So that the people in the community say, oh yeah, it's great, you know, all this sickness, it's being reported in the paper, so word is getting out. No, it's not. No, it's not. This is how you corral opinion. Because you convince the people that, you know, their issues are being shared with the rest of the world, when in reality they are not. And that you know, there's a number of issues that are starting to manifest. You know, one of the ones that's occurring very significantly is the respiratory problems, and we're seeing the same issues that have occurred after 9/11. After 9/11, when the air was declared clean by the Environmental Protection Agency, no need for the clean-up workers and the first responders to wear masks because the air is clean. They're all either dead or dying from respiratory illnesses. And we are in an accelerated situation in the Gulf Coast, where the clean-up workers were not provided with protective clothing and told not to wear masks, because just in case anybody did catch a photograph of them, if anybody did sneak through the security, it wouldn't look good if they were walking around in masks. The Corexit, which is the dispersant, Corexit 9500, and even more toxic version, Corexit 9527A, oil in itself is toxic at 11.2 parts per million. Corexit is toxic at 1.2 parts per million. And when the two are mixed, the toxicity increases on an order of magnitude. Now, you saw the people in the intro video. That was a video actually taken in August, and they said at the start, this is the only water we feel safe swimming in. Well, since then, there have been numerous cases of people getting very, very sick from swimming in their pools. Because the Corexit is not just being pumped into the Gulf, it's being sprayed. Now, BP have admitted spraying 1.1 million gallons of Corexit. But we also know that when they were asked, and I stress asked, to stop spraying by the Environmental Protection Agency, they refused. So we really have no reliable statistic as to how much of this toxin was sprayed, either aerially or pumped into the sea. So a lot of the toxins that are in the water, particularly swimming pool water, have got there one of two ways. Either directly from the aerial spraying, and in one pool was tested in northern Florida, and the pool water had a toxicity level of 50 parts per million. 50 parts per million. The other way in which it gets into the water is because the Gulf of Mexico is a feed source for the storm systems. The Gulf Stream is not called the Gulf Stream for nothing. If you wanted to poison the planet, there is no better place to initiate the process than the Gulf of Mexico. You know, 60, 70 years ago, that's what it looked like when there was an agenda to annihilate a chunk of the population. But these socio-psychopaths, and they're primarily the same people, these socio-psychopaths have got more sophisticated, because that's what it looks like now. I was in Peru for much of June, and I'm going to talk about my time in Peru, very, very significant. I'm going to talk about my time in Peru in the second half of the evening. But when I was in Peru, I was getting my feed of the information of what was going on in the Gulf directly from my former oilfield contacts and friends in the Gulf of Mexico. I didn't have any access to the mainstream media. I could obviously access the web, but mainly the information was coming from my former contacts. And I was so disturbed by what I was getting, I put out a number of newsletters. Normally I put out newsletters on average about once a month. But in the 3 weeks that I was in Peru, and I put out 3 newsletters in that time, because things were accelerating at a phenomenal rate of knots. Now, the official statistic is that during May, June, July in the United States, 44% of all news coverage was directly related to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, 44% is massive. I mean, that's half of the TV, nearly half of the TV time, half of column inches in the printed news. So when I came back to the UK, I was really interested to find out how much was being shared in the British media. So I landed, I think it was on Friday, July the 2nd, and the first thing I did was pick up all the papers at Heathrow Airport. And on the train back to Devon, I was going through the papers, and I couldn't find a single column inch about the Gulf of Mexico disaster. In fact, I had to get to page 51, I think it was, of the Times before I found anything at all, and that was about BP's stock price.